It's easy to compartmentalize various human rights struggles throughout history, but the struggle for the emancipation of enslaved people and women's rights were intertwined. As members of an oppressed class themselves, women brought empathy, compassion, intelligence, and mad organizational skill to the abolition movement. Welcome to Remedial Herstory, where we ask what happened to the women and put them in. In this series, we tell women's history from era to era from the perspectives of differing and diverse women. Women are half of history. Welcome to Herstory. This episode was sponsored by the South Carolina Humanities, the New Hampshire Women's Foundation, and the patrons of the Remedial Herstory Project. Let's talk Civil War basics. The secession of South Carolina from the Union on December 20th, 1860, resulted in America's bloodiest war. The result, of course, was the eventual emancipation of America's enslaved population. But the abolition movement started way before the American Civil War, and let's be honest, went much longer than the American Civil War. And guess who was helping make all that change? Yeah, all kinds of women. Recognizing the connection between racial and gender oppression, suffrage pioneer Susan B. Anthony urged her followers to, quote,
make the slave's case our own.
Let's take a look at some of the ways in which women of a variety of backgrounds started to do that. Advocacy for abolition goes way back. Phyllis Wheatley was born in West Africa and brought abolitionist ideas to the Americas through her poetry. Her poems included reflections on slavery, one titled On Being Brought from Africa, and opened white people's eyes to the humanity of enslaved people. Her work was even praised by General George Washington. I mean, he owned slaves himself, but go off, non-king. One of America's earliest advocates for ending slavery was Abigail Adams, the wife of John Adams. She's the one who famously pushed him to, quote, remember the ladies as they were debating this new system at the Continental Congress. He not so famously responded, I cannot but laugh, but yeah, it seems like she could have pushed him a little bit harder since women didn't get the right to vote for more than 100 years after that. But A for effort. Anyway, in September of 1774, Abigail wrote to John,
I wish most sincerely there was not a slave in the province. It always appeared a most iniquitous scheme to me. Fight ourselves for what we are daily robbing and plundering from those who have as good a right to freedom as we have.
In translation, she was like, is it just me, or is slavery fundamentally wrong? For Adams, liberty for all meant liberty for all. Leading up to the Civil War, many American women started writing about abolition in private letters and poems, but it was highly unusual for them to speak about it publicly, especially an African American woman. On September 21st, 1832, Maria W. Stewart Miller spoke before an audience at Franklin Hall. She was part of the African American Female Intelligence Society. Sounds like a superhero in training program to me. No, it wasn't. It was cooler than that. Stewart's Jeremiad, which is a form of speaking used by New England ministers, accused basically all white people of breaking their covenant with God for supporting slavery, or at least allowing it to exist in the South. Dang, Stewart brought the heat, literally the heat of hell. She traveled all throughout New England, sharing her message with Christian New Englands, which colloquially today means, come at me, bro. Women who had experienced the horrors of slavery themselves were, go figure, the best advocates for the abolition movement. Amy Hester, also known as Hetty Reckless, was born into slavery in southern New Jersey. She escaped violence at the hands of her mistress and fled to operate a safe house along the Underground Railroad in Philadelphia. In 1833, Hetty became a founding member of the Female Anti-Slavery Society. Again, this sounds like a superhero in training program. No, it was not. It was 100% cooler. They helped people escape slavery on the Underground Railroad, hiding them and protecting them and feeding them on their way. In 1861, after escaping from slavery, Harriet Jacobs wrote a piece called The Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, in which she documents the sexual abuse she experienced at the hands of her master. She escaped slavery by hiding out in her grandmother's attic for 7 years. People get impatient waiting in line for 7 minutes. When she finally escaped, she fled to New York, where she worked as a nanny and supported the feminist and abolitionist causes. She helped use her money to build a school for formerly enslaved people. You've probably heard of Harriet Tubman because, wow, her historic resume is incredibly impressive. After she escaped bondage, she went back into the South to help enslaved people get to freedom 13 times. Think about how many life-threatening trips that is. There, back, there, back, there, back, there, back. If you think it took me a long time to say that, think about how many times she risked her life to do that. In addition, Harriet Tubman gave many speeches on behalf of women's rights and abolition. But get ready for your mind to be blown. She couldn't even read or write. Sometimes we have no choice but to stand. Sojourner Truth, who escaped slavery in 1826, also rose to prominence, advocating for intersectional human rights. She gave a speech, "Ain't I a Woman?" that reminded everyone that Black women are women too, even though they aren't treated with the same feminine dignity that white women were. Intersectionality in these types of movements matters, and understanding the unique position that Black women like Truth are in is very important to understanding the abolition movement. Her advocacy reminds us that not all women experience these issues the same way. In spite of their own struggle to gain equal rights, white women spoke up on behalf of enslaved people and dedicated their lives and talents to liberating them. Margaret Fuller, a philosopher and transcendentalist colleague of Thoreau and Emerson, began to make connections between the conditions of the enslaved and the conditions of white women. Lucretia Mott was active in William Lloyd Garrison's Anti-Slavery Society, but when that society refused to allow women to be present in some of their meetings, she founded her own female anti-slavery society in 1833. She was a Quaker preacher, accustomed to speaking her mind and sharing her ideas in front of male audiences, and was not going to be held back by a bunch of men. Her sister, Martha Coffin Wright, was a friend of Harriet Tubman, and they worked together to found the first women's rights convention in 1848. Lydia Maria Child thought abolition should be considered in a broader social reform context. Born into a religious family in Massachusetts, she founded a school and became a teacher. She also was the editor to a magazine, Juvenile Miscellany, which was designed for school children, but she lost her Southern audience when she declared her abolitionist views in one of her writings. But the haters didn't stop her. In 1833, she doubled down and wrote a piece called An Appeal in Favor of That Class of Americans Called Africans. While most people relate abolition to Northerners, there were certainly lots of Southerners who advocated for abolition. Enter Sarah and Angelina Grimke. Sarah and Angelina Grimke were born into immeasurable wealth and lived on a plantation in the South with hundreds of slaves. Each of them was so wealthy that they had a personal slave that followed them around. Wow. After witnessing slavery in the South, both sisters came to abhor slavery. Angelina Grimke wrote to William Lloyd Garrison after leaving her home in the South in 1820, telling him that she was willing to speak out against slavery. Garrison published her letter in his journal called The Liberator. The letter was read widely across the country, and in Charleston, South Carolina, where she was from, it was burned. Faced with ridicule, the Grimke sisters doubled down. They traveled around the North, giving speeches on the lecture circuit about slavery. But as women, they faced a double burden. Sometimes when they came to a community to speak to what was called mixed audiences, people were so up in arms that they were talking to men that mobs would often appear and run them out of town. Both sisters had a profound and positive influence on women's rights on the lecture circuit. But they faced backlash as well. Male abolitionists were concerned that the fact that they were women would take away from their messaging about slavery, and so they worked to have them removed from the circuit. The sisters were originally inspired to impose slavery because their brother had children with an enslaved woman. One of these children was Francis James Grimke, who went on to marry Charlotte Fortin, who came from a prominent free Black abolitionist family who lived in Philadelphia. Fortin's family had a long history of helping Black people escape bondage on the Underground Railroad. She trained as a teacher and became the first Black graduate of the Salem Normal School. She was one of the first African American teachers in Salem, Massachusetts, and became a member of the Female Anti-Slavery Society. Another South Carolina native, Mary Boynton Chestnut, was the matriarch of a family that owned nearly 1,000 slaves. During this period of history, Chestnut composed a diary revealing the inner life of the plantation. Long after she died, her diary was published, and it provides a lot of insights for historians about life on the plantation. Some women contributed to the abolitionist cause by articulating a religious and moral opposition to slavery. Harriet Beecher Stowe was the member of a now famous family of ministers. In 1832, her father moved her to Cincinnati, Ohio. There, she crossed the border into Kentucky and became witness to slavery in action. In her father's home, she would listen to the debates about slavery, and after hearing about it, she became, aware of the completely legal terror that was happening to human beings just south of where she lived, and started to use her talent to take a stand against this oppression. In 1852, while sitting upstairs in the attic and her sister was downstairs watching her many children, she composed a book called Uncle Tom's Cabin. Legend has it that Abraham Lincoln said, "So you're the little lady that started this great war." Kind of a backhanded compliment, Abe, but yeah, let's give the lady credit. It can't be denied that her book really impacted readers' opinions about slavery. Her home was a stop on the Underground Railroad. By the late 1850s, divisions between the North and the South were incredibly raw. John Brown, who was responsible for bleeding Kansas, planned a raid on Harper's Ferry, Virginia, which arguably started the war in 1859. Harriet Tubman was supposed to be with him that day, but she was on another mission helping people along the Underground Railroad. Thank God she wasn't, because she would be instrumental in the Civil War to follow. After Harper's Ferry, the South felt attacked, and that's because they were. And when Lincoln was elected, that was the final straw. After the Civil War started, Julia Ward Howe traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet with Abraham Lincoln. While there, she overheard some Union soldiers singing the now famous song, John Brown's Body. She was inspired to pen new words to that song, which became the battle hymn of the Republic. These words inspired and invigorated the Northern armies to go on and win the Civil War. The song outlined the moral imperative to end slavery. She said,
"Let the hero, born of woman, crush the serpent with his heel, since God is marching on. As he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free, while God is marching on. He's coming like the glory of the morning on the wave. He is wisdom to the mighty. He is honor to the brave. So the world shall be his footstool and the soul of wrong his slave. Our God is marching on."
Efforts to improve the lives of the now freed African Americans continued long after the war. Martha Schofield took her life savings down to South Carolina, where she started a school for the now free folk. Students could learn basic academics and life skills like cooking and sewing. The Schofield Normal and Industrial School is now open, and you bet kids there are learning about her. Social norms in the 19th century demanded that middle class and wealthy women dedicate their lives and energies to the home and family. But joke's on society, because those women found it incredibly frustrating to deal with these gendered expectations, and they dedicated their lives not only to upending these gender norms, but ending slavery as well. Thus, American women found their voice in the human rights movements of the day. Women wrote books, letters, essays, and songs that helped bring about the abolitionist movement and end slavery across the country. Some of them started schools, and others risked their lives on the Underground Railroad. Some had power and wielded it to help others, while others found their power and escaped bondage. Regardless of how these women, and the many women we didn't mention, helped the abolitionist cause, we can be grateful for the historic steps towards a more equal society that they helped us make. By the end of this era, so much remained in question. Would the federal government remain involved in helping to demand a more equal society? Would the new politicization of women remain? Would they stay outside of the domestic sphere and in this very public sphere of human rights activity? How would women's advocacy be received? And for both Black people and women, was suffrage the obvious next step? Thanks for watching. If you want to dive deeper, head over to our website, www.remedialherstory.com. You can find lesson plans, primary sources, video recommendations, and so much more. Let's make herstory.